This week, we catch up with Prince Adam and Man-at-Arms on the moon of Phantos, where they have come to visit Queen Elmora and buy some photanium, which is used for making weapons and shields. Adam notices that Elmora seems miserable, but Man-at-Arms doesn't give a monkey's, and insists they return to Eternia. After they leave the room, a curtain pulls back to reveal Skeletor and Merman, as well as some presumably evil dude with spikes on his head and a weird arm, who we later learn goes by the name of Strong Arm. Skeletor helpfully explains that Adam's shipment of photanium is worthless metal, and that the real photanium will be coming to Snake Mountain. Elmora demands that now she has cooperated, Skeletor should release his prisoners. Skeletor being Skeletor, of course, he doesn't, instead choosing to cast a spell to make Elmora really old and bent to Skeletor's will. Back on Eternia, Man-at-Arms has made weapons out of the worthless metal, and they keep breaking. No one is cruel enough to suggest that maybe Man-at-Arms is just rubbish at making weapons, and instead wonder if maybe Elmora has cheated them. Adam, Man-at-Arms and Cringer pop off to Castle Grayskull, where the sorceress confirms that Skeletor has forced Elmora into an alliance. This revelation prompts a speedy He-Man transformation. At the palace, Man-at-Arms tells Teela she can't come to Phantos, even though there appears to be space on this jaunt for the ever-useless Stratos and some unfamiliar green lunatic who's so nondescript he only gets 2 lines and a rubbish name. Cut to the quick by this insult, Teela tags along anyway, undetected. As our heroes troll across a plain on Phantos, they are cheerily greeted by a vision of the aged Elmora. He-Man helps the situation by tactfully not recognizing her, though I suppose it doesn't help that she's talking in Evil Lynn's voice. This is probably why Evil Lynn didn't appear in this episode. Anyway, the discussion doesn't go well, and Elmora kidnaps Battlecat and Stratos, and might well have done more if Teela didn't intervene, earning herself a telling off from Man-at-Arms and a sleazy thank you from He-Man. It's now time to break into Elmora's castle. He-Man decides that this must be done through the photanium refinery, and furthermore they must go in disguise. Since the refinery workers wear gray jumpsuits, He-Man and his friends decide that half a jumpsuit each will be sufficient. And thus it proves, since they only manage to move halfway across a room before discarding the disguises in favor of having a tussle with Merman and Strong Arm. It transpires in this scene that Strong Arm's arm can be extended to quite surprising lengths, a la Inspector Gadget. Rather surprisingly, Strong Arm's crazy arm ability proves to be an advantage in this fight, and he actually manages to shut He-Man inside a coffin thing. This explains why we never see Strong Arm again. Skeletor must have fired him after this episode for being dangerously competent. What is slightly odder is that after capturing He-Man, Strong Arm and Merman run away from Man-at-Arms, Teela and the Green Dude. Fortunately, He-Man breaks out of the coffin in very little time, as I think we all knew he would. The next scene gives us an explanation of who the green fellow is. He's called Lizard Man, and based on his characteristics, I think I could have come up with that name myself. He-Man rids himself of Lizard Man and Man-at-Arms at this juncture, telling them to go away and find Battlecat and Stratos, and not to disturb him while he and Teela break into Elmora's chambers. Meanwhile, Queen Elmora amuses herself by filling up episode runtime with flashbacks about how she used to chain He-Man up and he'd break out, in happy carefree days before that brazen hussy Teela came into He-Man's life and created so much tension. Though that may just be my interpretation. Anyway, thinking about these happy memories gives Elmora sufficient willpower to knock Merman and Strong Arm out. This displeases Skeletor to such an extent that he casts another spell on Elmora, which has the effect that every time she sees He-Man, she will see him as Skeletor. Now, this is a clever spell, and it does have the intended effect. When He-Man comes sauntering in, Elmora does indeed see him as Skeletor. The lapse in logic is only too apparent though. Skeletor told Elmora precisely what he was going to do, so at the very least Elmora ought to be thinking, now hang on, is this actually Skeletor? Things only get more confusing when the real Skeletor appears, claiming He-Man is Skeletor, though he rather gives the game away by engaging in dialogue which immediately reveals that he's the baddie. Still, Elmora doesn't grasp the obvious and opts to chain both He-Man and Skeletor up. Once He-Man breaks out, Elmora is able to conclude who the real enemy is. I feel it would have been easier if He-Man had simply punched Skeletor. Queen Elmora is the very beautiful ruler of Phantos. She was once placed under a spell by Skeletor, who occupied Phantos to gain control of its photanium supply. The spell made her appear old and haggard and bound her to Skeletor's will, though she retained a deep hatred of him. Skeletor further complicated matters by draping He-Man in illusions that made it impossible for Elmora to tell them apart. He-Man, however, reminded Elmora about her spin magic, which bound the target in photanium chains that only he could break. She used it on both He-Man and Skeletor, who released Elmora from his spell in return for He-Man releasing him from his chains.